Especially in recent days, local and international watchdogs have raised a lot of concern that this space is narrowing, not expanding for us as a country. Reports by Civic, Monitor, Human Rights Watch and Afrobarometer are pointing to increased arrests, court cautions and actions, as well as administrative restrictions, especially on NGOs and civil societies, and heightened surveillance, trends that are becoming more and more sensitive to the country as we head into the general elections that are nine days away. Now, the recent arrest and continued detention of civic rights advocate, that is Dr. Sarah Biret, has reignited this debate about the rule of law, democratic accountability, and the safety of civic engagement. So this morning, we want to examine the state of civic space in Uganda and what has changed and why it matters at such a time as this. And of course, where as a country we may be headed should this actually stay as the trajectory. Joining me for this conversation is Godbert Tumshabe, a civic rights advocate and governance commentator with long-standing engagement on democracy, accountability, and also state-citizen relationships in Uganda. We're also being joined by Fred Bamwine, who's Commissioner, RDC Secretariat and the Office of the President, bringing the government's administrative and security perspective. We also do have Timothy Chemongas, Executive Director, Center for Policy, joining us, focusing on public policy, governance, as well as the electoral processes. I'm going to allow the distinguished gentlemen their salutations to us this morning as I say to them, Happy New Year, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Godbert.
Yeah, thanks very much, and good morning, colleagues. A very happy New Year to you, our viewers. Very delighted to be here in the new year, and really looking at the issues that that are impacting on our country very significantly. I think that I would say that the debate we are having really, I was like, oh, we need to have the debate about the future. So sometimes we get lost in the debate about the past and the present, but I want us to really also look at this, whatever is happening now, what are its implications for the future, and I hope we can have a meaningful conversation. Okay, yeah. All right. Commissioner?
Thanks so much. Good morning, viewers and my colleagues. Happy New Year to everybody. I was here on fast, by the way. So I want to congratulate all Ugandans who have passed last year and entered this year, which is largely a political year. We are going to have elections of leaders in this country, from president up to chairman of C1. Therefore, I'd like to call upon everybody to participate. And in participation, we need to look at the credibility of candidates who are going to provide services to you. But at the same time, to be cautious about the kind of conduct and language that you may use during campaign, because after elections, you are going to live in this village together as residents. So guard against talking about things which may embarrass you after elections, because you are going to remain neighbors in this village. Okay, all right. And in Uganda.
Timothy.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Happy New Year to the viewers and to colleagues present here. I'm glad that we are all here, and also more importantly, we all are in a country that remains to be the only country that we have. And my observation as far as the ongoing elections are concerned, you see that there seems to be extremism. Everyone seems to be pulling from the extreme side. And where that places the country, of course, is in a crisis mode that we need to solve. But glad to be here, and I think the concerns around the shrinking civic space is more ardent, but also the concern around it being done with the highest level of impunity.
Okay, all right. On that note, allow me to start with the representation of government, Fred Bamwine. In regards to the civic space, how would you characterize the state of civic space in Uganda in terms of its openness, or is it closed, or is it contested?
The civic space in this country, it is as it is supposed to be. because it becomes very controversial when you discuss the civic space today without putting into context of the historical perspective of this country. At some stage, this country, you could not talk about the civic space until NRM government came to power and put processes in place which resulted into formation of the current constitution as amended, which guarantees this civic space. But within the civic space where the controversy is, people will talk of rights and talk of democracy and without due regard of responsibilities. And I think that's where the contestation is likely to be. For instance, it is my right to drive a car. But in Uganda, they say you must drive on the left. Obviously, you have interfered with my rights. But in due regard of other road users and the laws of the country, you are guided that you have to drive on the left. Now, if you meet somebody who said, me, I must drive, what's important, the car is mine, the road, that's where the contestation is. Unfortunately, the framers of government, by the beginning of government when it began, it was aware that in the world you will find people who want to have rights 100% as they are supposed to be, without due regard of the public rights. For instance, it's true, priest is coming to work, but there's also somebody going to hospital. There's also somebody going to the market. So it is the responsibility of government to make sure that there are regulations, both legal and administrative, to make sure that as you enjoy your rights, you don't tamper to Mushabe's rights. So where your right stops is when the other one starts his right to enjoy. But once you start enjoying your rights and start entering in others' rights, then Mr. Government comes and says, no. You enjoy your rights, but you stop here, and this one also can. It's a delicate situation, because normally by nature, mankind does not want limitations. Even if it is a consumption, if it is spending, you wish to spend as you wish. But you must be cautious about the neighbor. And government is put in place to make sure the rights of the neighbor are also protected. So that's where we come from. But also people talk about Uganda as an old country of 63 years. But we are comparing ourselves with old democracies like Britain, like America. So most standards, we want to say, in America they do. And actually the administrative restrictions, which are in those countries, are not like here. I think we allowed in too much space very quickly without putting into perspective our history, and also to know where we need to go. I normally see Ugandans, they enjoy to talk about the East Asian tigers, the Malaysias, the Singapore, the China, and others. And when they are talking about them, how they have developed, how they are good, they don't bother to check how do they make it. So if you are to move very quickly as a country to avoid what could have happened to other countries and ourselves in the past, you must tread carefully. Like for instance, this is an election
speaking of
time.
treading,
Yes.
Allow us to tread voices and hear from God by here. God by the very interesting submissions that have been given by the position of government, allowing too much space too quickly without perspective to our history, and you yourself starting this conversation by saying that we need a futuristic perspective. We need to stop relying and referring to the past or the present where we are. How do we navigate the future? So in light with what he has submitted, what are the indicators that citizens must look out to in order to assess whether the civic freedoms are too much, too quickly, or they're expanding or they're shrinking?
No, thank you, Priscilla, and thanks, Fred, for those submissions. Let me start off with the quotation from one of former U.S. President James Madison, 1788. He said, "If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." I always find this a very, very instructive statement, that you enable government to control the governed, the way Fred has been describing, but then you have to enable government to control itself. Now, the challenge for us as a country here is that the government focuses on controlling the governed, and it does not control itself. Secondly, you see, the history that Fred has talked about is important. Now, my problem with the people who normally refer to history is that this continent has developed expertise in using history to explain why we should not go forward. Every time you sit in discussions, people tell you slave trade, colonialism, these are our obstacles. But you're talking about historical phenomena that happened many years ago. And I'm not saying they are not relevant. I'm saying we should study them to be able to determine how we are able to go into the future. I have refused to accept that, because even today, if we talked about education now, Fred would tell you that because of our colonial education system, that's why we are here. And I'm like, no, if for 63 years, you have no capacity to break out of that colonial system, and you've preserved the structures of the colonial education system to determine how your kids are trained, then you are the one who is incompetent. While the colonialism was a problem, for the last 63 years, you need to have spent all your time and energy to be able to resolve that. Thirdly, you see, I was here with Fred, actually. Fred and I go way back to high school. So we're in high school. Fred, I don't know if you remember. I think I was with you when we attended the consultations on the new constitution. Yes. So the commissioners, the Miriam Atembes, the Odochis, they came to consult us in high school. It was an exciting moment for us as a people. So most of the safeguards and the spaces, by the Fred is saying, we opened up to first, we were discussing them. And we all agreed and said, this is how we want to be governed as a country. These are the safeguards we put in place. So the challenge that we're having, which Fred is complaining about, I really don't understand. These NRM people, sometimes they think very strangely. Because you see, a country is built on two pillars. One, it's built on institutions of state. And then on institutions of citizenship. The institutions of state, I always tell colleagues, I said, if you want to give Museveni any credit, it is not about the building of the roads and this factor and the other. No, it is him and his colleagues fighting a war and creating an environment where we are able now to reconfigure the institutions of state and citizenship that can on how we can be governed. Now, for the last almost, are we not 30 years of the Constitution now?
Yes.
Yeah, 30 years. Mr. Museveni has focused on dismantling the constitutional architecture that we adopted in 1995, and in the process demobilized state institutions. I've been giving the latest example, Fred, that you all of a sudden create a political party that turns a Speaker of Parliament, who is supposed to be the head of one of the pillars of state, and you turn her into a master of ceremony on political campaigns. It's never, you just can't believe it, that a Speaker of Parliament can be an MC at political campaign rallies. But you've seen the other institutions. We have a principle these days, because you talked about the arrest of Sarah Biret, who is actually my staff. We call it police to prison pipeline. So the regime has created a system where if you are arrested by police, the destination is prison. So in other words, the police, the DPP, the courts are all designed to deliver you to jail. Whether legitimately or not, because again, the case of Sarah, you know, I saw that magistrate at Uganda Road Court making a ruling on an application, on a bail application where there was no objection, and I couldn't believe it. I also learned from this case that there is an office of the Director of Public Prosecutions at the Uganda Road Court, which is a misnomer because the DPP is supposed to be a private, it's supposed to be an independent institution. Okay. When you have the DPP seated with the magistrate and whatever, you don't know what would happen. But let me make one last comment, which is the other pillar of the institutions of citizenship, because that's where the civic space is. Citizens are able to exercise their sovereignty through what we call citizens' formations. Citizens are organized. As individuals, you and I, Priscilla, as individuals, we don't have capacity to deal with the state, especially a rogue state. Now, when that happens, citizens organize in formations. So citizens who want to participate in active politics, they organize in political parties. Those who studied and have professions, they organize in professional bodies. Those who are engaged in economic activity, they organize in cooperatives and these circles, and we see. Those who have cultural background, they organize in cultural institutions. So when you look at what has happened now and why the civic space you can see as a problem is that since while the 1995 Constitution created the environment for these institutions to survive and thrive, the current regime has focused on dismantling all these institutions by imposing a restrictive legislation, by using security to harass them. As at 2014, between 2009 and 2014, we had recorded 29 office break-ins by alleged thieves. But actually these were security operations, because I remember when we talked to the IGP, when we organized a meeting with the IGP, then the break-ins stopped. Then administrative restrictions, as we had said. There have been financial restrictions. So you can see all these restrictions, and that is what has basically brought what we are going to
let's look at this conversation through the lenses of policy. Timothy, this is where I'd like you to come in and give us your monitoring and evaluation report, especially in light with the current election cycle that we are in, repression of civic spaces in terms of constraints on association, assembly and expression.
Thank you, Priscilla. You know, the bottom line and the benchmark should be the law. That whether you are the government or the citizen, the bottom line and the threshold for which we should engage or act is the threshold is in the Constitution. And as Godba indicates, it is the selective application of this law, but also interpretation of this law that has brought us to where we are at today. That whereas the government would attempt or will make a case to be operating in goodwill, if you look at the actions, if you look at the decisions, look at the surrounding factors to how the decisions are reached at, it tells you that there is a fundamental problem in terms of how the governance of the country is going. If looking at the submissions around the civic space, and part of the submission is that the civic space is at the right place. It is where it should be. Probably, if that is right, if the parameter is within, let's say, what the NRM government provides. But if indeed the threshold is around what the Constitution provides, that citizens should be able to engage, citizens should be able to express themselves, recognizing the responsibilities and the rights that come along with most of these requirements, I think it's where the definition lies. But more importantly for me is around how the government has strategically positioned itself in ensuring that it identifies individuals who either hold different views, probably have some level of influence in the society, and attempting to use the criminal justice system to be able to curtail but also send a message out there. The arrest, for example, of Sarah Biret, which of course is not an isolated incident. We've seen some of this in the past where members in the civil society, Nicholas Opio, have been arrested previously, but also seeing a very unique twist where we see some of the religious leaders being arrested now. A turn that is very interesting, but also is the level of impunity that you can see surrounding that. And it could be true that the state will say that there are charges to be responded to, and definitely that is for the courts to give a position on. But ultimately, I think it's important to understand the thinking around most of this, because we are in an election season, and that if you have to arrest individuals, come up with charges, and most of them are trumped up charges. If many of us were in court, we could see that there is a deliberate effort to come up with charges that are nowhere, and most of these seems to be individuals who are aimed at serving a specific section or individuals in attempts to make a case. And so there is a fundamental problem in how we've interpreted, but also we've used the law, but also more importantly, how we've undermined the institutions, and God, as God says, to ensure that we realize or serve interests of a specific group of people. Of course, lastly, I should say that in terms of how elections should look like, because the test of a democracy is in how the citizens should be able to express themselves, and largely through the elections, to determine how their leaders, who their leaders should be, and how the citizens should participate in that process. What we see today, I think there is a fundamental problem. I've seen, for example, these elections where you see the nomination of candidates with very, very unclear circumstances. You see how the actors in the different sectors, from civil society and all the other sectors, being managed to ensure that the direction of how the elections or even the outcome should look like is more or less predetermined. But more importantly is to say that if indeed we do recognize that the Constitution is the threshold, the continued use of the historical perspective, which of course is important, to undermine or to frustrate any decisions that can help the country move forward in a progressive manner. And what, for example, NRM colleagues keep using the histories is really is because there is lack of proper points today to ensure that where we are at and the realities that we are living today should be cognizant of today's realities, not the past. Okay.
Clearly, Timothy and Godba have a different version of moving forward. Your moving forward is far best than the government's moving forward. But for the case of Sarah Biret, last week a civil rights advocate, Dr. Sarah Biret, having been arrested on charges under the Data Protection and Privacy Act, accused of unauthorized access and use of information from the National Voters Register. Godba, in that regard, you were one of the first people to, appear. Of course, how we got to find out is her posting through her social media platforms that her house has been surrounded by security forces. You will come in and clear yourself. Let's first hear for the cases right now. How has this development been received through the civil society and NGO community? Especially in the fact that if someone is arrested without charges, and then some charges have to be cooked up, and then...
Sarah's case is the highest expression of what the rogue regime looks like. Yeah, it's rogue in the sense that Sarah is not just an ordinary Ugandan. Is a leader in civil society. She's a lawyer.
Fred Badmwine seems to disagree.
Yeah,
she's a president.
She's a member of the Uganda Law Society. So she sits on a number of international bodies
representing Uganda.
So, in other words, the first call, if you had the police that understands its work and understands that it has to dignify citizens, that Sarah is one of those persons who, if she was accused of any crime or was suspected of committing any crime, she would be summoned to police. That's the first point. Secondly, I think it's wrong for Uganda police and the Ugandan military to invade a residence of a person of Sarah's character, or you, Priscilla, or Fred, or whatever, because this is not a terrorist. Not all of a sudden you have to look for some 20, 30 uniformed and armed officers to go and invade the house of someone. As if this is a terrorist where there is going to be a crisis, there is going to be fighting. I really don't understand why Ugandan security agencies have taken on this posture of threatening citizens, because you see, it's basically what they are trying to do is to create fear. That's why they take this approach. Thirdly, Sarah lives on the other side of Namugongo. I don't remember the village. So, in normal practice, when you are arrested,
present them to the nearest.
You are presented to the nearest police station, and a record is opened in the record book. It's a standard police procedure. So by the time you just almost kidnap someone from Mukono and move her to Natete, of course you're already seeing a process that is completely fraud by every measure. And then you get her and hold her for 3 days, and there are no charges that are preferred. So for 3 days, you are looking for a case someone has committed, and I'm like, okay, let's assume, even if the regime is scared, by the way, because I think this is out of fear. That's really absolute weakness of what normally regimes that are turning authoritarian, they normally tend to shift towards fearing everybody. I've already said that I think there's one of the philosophers who said, when a government fears people, there is liberty. When people fear government, there is tyranny. The problem with Uganda is that government and people fear each other. So what you see is anarchy. The way everybody operates, the citizens are running, then the regime security are running and doing all kinds of senseless things. So finally, even when the time came for Sarah to be presented in court, which was, I think, was on the 4th day, there were no charges. The charges were actually prepared when we were there at the Buganda Road Court. So for every, and then of course I should mention that when the case was, when the court hearing happened, and our legal team applied for bail, and the prosecutor did not object to bail, but the prosecutor just said they wanted to respond. And then our lawyers said, no, if it's about response, we are applying for an adjournment to 3 p.m. so that the prosecutor can come and respond. Instead of the magistrate responding to the request, she says, no, Sarah is remanded until January 21st for the state to respond. And because 21st is after the elections, which are on January 15th, every reasonable Ugandan, every sound-minded Ugandan would see that the objective was to lock up Sarah up to until after the elections. So that's basically they had used the same principle that I've told you, police to prison pipeline.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
So, which means that any Ugandan today, including Fred, by the way, these NRM people sometimes they think they want to be arrested, and all the indications that even the Fred, someone is going to be there. I said, I want to look this one up. You will go, because when there's I've always said, in a lawless society, whenever there is a breakdown in law and order, yeah, everybody is a potential victim.
On that regard,
whether you've committed any offense or not.
This is where I would like to bring in government. First of all, Fred, you are in touch with security. What are the procedures that are meant to be followed should someone be arrested?
No, before I go to the procedures, I want to be recorded that I don't agree with your modulation.
Why?
Somebody cannot talk twice when he has already created a litany of allegations and falsehoods, and you expect me to come here and I fold my hands and watch. So I disagree for somebody to speak twice when I'm here.
Thank you so much for your disagreement. Yes. Now you can continue with the question at hand.
To begin with, I'm happy that I'm with people who psychologically have been looking for.
Looking for them?
Yes. There are some people who are educated in this country, and they believe, and they have a thinking, that in 1962, we got total independence. And I fundamentally disagree with them. Because if we had got total independence in 1962, you shouldn't be having foreigners in trying up to now, to date, to destabilizing this country using other forces. Of course, through me, I will not mention individuals, but they use Ugandans to destabilize their own state. The instabilities we have had in this country, much as they were affronted by, they were being implemented by Africans, but these are foreign interests. And up to now, foreign interest has never stood. I think we have heard about something called Panama and Venezuela. So colonialism have not gone, imperialism have not gone, and actually it has come in a subtle manner. So when you are seeing what is happening, some of us, we are sure that there is even a foreign hand in all of what is happening in Africa. Now, my friend, my long-term friend, Godba, mentioned about incompetent and rogue government. And in his heart of hearts, he knows, because he is not young and he's read, that we have had rogue governments in this country. And you know what they meant. So I know he's just throwing it there to attract sympathy and also account to some of his...
That being said, Fred, what are the procedures of arrest? No, you can't. He's still answering my question, which he hasn't.
No. This is a
procedures of arrest.
No.
Yeah.
This is a litany that I was writing. That's why I have a pen and a paper. And that's my training.
Why don't you state the right positions instead of now speaking on what I'm thinking?
Therefore, rights, democracy without responsibility is equal to anarchy. And I know some people who are sponsored would wish to see that kind of anarchy. And for us as a state, we have a responsibility to make sure that the state of Uganda does not collapse. The dramas of anarchy can be there, but we shall make sure, whether we are called rogues, to make sure that every citizen of this country enjoys his rights. But your rights should not interfere with Bamwini's rights. Okay. There's what we call public rights.
That you made clear even in your earlier submission. Talk to us about the procedures of arrest of a citizen of Uganda.
But you have told me to go to the procedures when he has mentioned that institutions of government were destroyed by the president, and I cannot take it. If there were no institutions, why is he talking about court? If there were no institutions, why is he talking about parliament?
So talk to us about the institution of security.
I must first remove that. I must first remove that litany, because Godwin is in him being a lawyer. He's aware that nobody can be produced to court without a preferred charge. He's just committing class suicide, and some of us, I think we cannot take that. Now, I want to tell the country and those who are watching us that every activity of arrest and government is all intelligence-led. And you are asking the procedure of arrest and the standard. The procedure of arrest in this country and the standard of arrest and the decision where to be taken actually, it depends on the intelligence estimate. Between me and you don't know what kind of intelligence, because intelligence, first of all, is not shared. Secondly, it is not taken to court. It is only when it has been processed. That's when it can go to court. So, me, I will not talk about court, because it's a case in a court, but I will talk about the procedure and standard of arrest that depends on the intelligence estimate on a suspect. Fortunately, in Uganda, according to the Constitution, every person arrested, not until he has pleaded guilty or court has pronounced, is still a suspect. Therefore, it's unpermissible for one to say Bamwine is a person of Manya, not an ordinary citizen. No, you don't know the kind of intelligence security had to apprehend a certain person. And I think, because the bottom line at the end of the day is to provide service. Which kind of service are we talking about now? The service of a stable Uganda. The service of a lawful Uganda.
Okay.
And I'm surprised lawyers here.
Speaking of service, Fred, there's also been an argument that the public service sector is being used to support and protect the regime. How do you speak of that?
It may be true, by the way. Now, after talking of service provided Uganda, a secure Uganda, not an incited Uganda, not an inflamed country, it is true an errant, an overzealous security officer can go overboard. That's very true. That's why, for instance, in the police, there's what they call police standard unit. If you can go and report. That's why there is police tribunal and police court. If one has become an overzealous and went beyond the board. So, but in this country, apart from the sitting president, all of us as potential suspects. Okay. It is upon these lawyers. It is upon these lawyers to go to court and argue their case against their client, and if the judicial officers find their arguments have merit,
there's also a growing concern, Fred, of the mad relationship between police, judiciary, and prison that is leading to the pipeline that was being referred to by by Godpa earlier. In that regard, how would you respond that the state is using the police, the state is having the judiciary in its palms, and it's using the prisons all collaboratively to actually bring people the state feels is not happy with?
No, Godpa is not being honest. He knows those offices, as they have mentioned, everybody has a part of the dish. The police picks you, depending on some allegations. After picking you, it takes the file to the DPP. Now, if the DPP finds the no merit in the charge sheet, then the case, either he can direct further investigations, or even can drop the charges. And even these charges can be dropped at any stage. Now, when the two have finished, when the two have finished, then they take the file to court. Now, it is in a court, when it is in a court, then the police does not have any responsibility there. It is the DPP now who argues with the lawyers or the suspect until the judicial officer is convinced on which decision to take. By the way, even if the judicial officer takes a wrong decision in your view, it's not an alpha and omega. You can appeal at a higher level. You are talking of G1, you can go to High Court, you can go to Court of Appeal, you can go to, depending on your discomfortedness. But what I don't subscribe, according to my colleagues, they are forgetting that let it be executive, let it be parliament, let it be judiciary. All of us are providing a service to the majority of the citizens. Maybe it will take me to question who is a citizen, because I heard them speaking. If they arrest Bamwine and you say, oh, the citizens are, you mean Bamwine is 50 million Ugandans? If you arrest Bamwine, is one of the citizens.
All right.
But it does not mean that Bamwine has an authority.
Staying with the court's law and the democratic space. Timothy, allow me to bring you in here. Sarah Biret has been remanded until the 21st of January, citing ongoing investigations. Now, in that regard, there are concerns, and I think there should be concerns validated, that the courts are actually increasingly perceived as tools of managing dissent rather than protecting rights.
That's true. The overall concern is that institutions of the state are actually being used and have been incapacitated as a fundamental concern, that the institutions have been incapacitated to actually realize their original objective. And that would include even the different arms of government, where you've had concerns around how Parliament handles many of its issues, including the objectivity in terms of it supporting government to realize its objective. That extends to the judiciary. That if you see the way the criminal justice system has been designed as of now, look at the manner in which many of the cases are being handled, and that of Sarah Biret really is one of them. There are many other concerns that are in courts that have not been handled. We've just last year had a case where the Supreme Court instructed the DPP to transfer all the cases in the civil, in the military courts to the civilian courts. To date, I think most of those have actually not been transferred, and there's no clear report to that. If you look at how, for example, and it is true that when you go to the Uganda Magistrate Court, you'll find that there is a DPP officer who has been designated to that specific area, an area that specifically brings a very unique way in how the criminal justice has been designed, not only to frustrate or target specific individuals, but also to twist how the law should operate. Again, it is true that many of these cases are as a function of discretion, and that if you are a magistrate or an officer of the law, you have some level of discretion. And the concern is around how that discretion is being misused. And many times, if for example, if you are to look at the case of Sarah, irrespective of the matter, you see that the charge sheet is presented, and the lawyers of Sarah actually request and put an application for the bail. And if you look at the discretion that the magistrate uses in remanding Sarah after the application has been put, it brings a bit of a question. And looking at the timing that it's 21 days, and that's after the elections. And really the case of Sarah is just an example. There are many issues that we are seeing in our judicial system that are not very interesting to see. And for the many reasons, when you try to connect the dots, you see that either there is a highest level of incompetence by the judicial officers, which I choose not to believe, because many of these are our colleagues who understand the law very well, and if allowed to exercise that discretion, I think they will do it better. But I think it's in how the system, it's in how the individuals have made it very deliberate to ensure that how decisions, how the prosecution is looked at is in a biased way.
Okay.
And it's really in the test of the judicial system.
All right, as we close this conversation, we still have to now look futuristically speaking. How do we rebuild an engaging civic space moving forward? Godba, in your closing remarks.
I thought I'm supposed to talk about this man who claims to know what I think.
And no, we don't have time for
Okay,
that.
but let me very
You'll have
quickly.
that on the cup of tea after here.
Yeah. No, but I think, Priscilla, it would be unfair if I didn't just clarify one important thing, that the people in Fred's position have developed this element called, they throw this word called intelligence-led. And I think every time they use it, I feel like there is some manifestation of profound levels of ignorance about the use of these terms. Because intelligence, we have intelligence and then investigations. But intelligence can be broken down into several things. So we have criminal intelligence. When you are dealing with someone whom you are accusing of crime, you are basically dealing with criminal intelligence. And we know that criminal intelligence produces information that can lead to arrest, and that is an arrest by the police. So that's how it is supposed to be. So when everything they throw around intelligence-led, it's basically to tell us that you don't know what you are talking about, which I think is some profound levels of intelligence, some profound levels of ignorance. Secondly, you see Sarah's case is a unique one because the Electoral Commission provided a voters register to presidential candidates and political parties to be able to say, these are the voters. So in other words, the people are supposed to go and look through this data and confirm that these are the voters that are where I'm looking for votes. So someone has gone and looked through this data and presented to you that there is a guy called Godba, same names, same NIN number, same data, and this guy appears at 5 polling stations across the country. I thought that's why the register was given, because we've even asked. He said, "Is the Electoral Commission the complainant?" Nobody knows. But on the future, incidentally. So we are discussing this in the context of the ongoing elections. This election is basically a binary, because first of all, it has shaped out as a two-horse race between Bobi Wine and Museveni. Yeah. And it is divided into two groups. There were winners who are protecting their gains, and there is a whole bunch of people around Bobi Wine and others who are absorbing the pain. So it is perfectly fine for people like Fred to be talking the way they are talking, because he has a government job, he's paid a salary, he drives a car, he has what. So it really makes sense. I give it to him. Okay. But
unfortunately, also due to intelligence, I have to end this conversation. Fred Bamwine, thank you so much for your time. Timothy Chamonges, thank you so much for your time.
It has ended.
Due to intelligence, that brings us to the end of this conversation. We do have our correspondents that are on ground who are going to be giving us election updates, and therefore, I and these gentlemen will continue the conversation offline as we allow you, the correspondents, giving you live updates. Good morning.